The first agenda item, I will begin by doing a roll call. When I call out your name, please unmute your microphone and confirm that you are here in attendance. Councillor Bradnam.
I'm present, thank you.
Councillor Bywater.
Yes, I'm present.
Councillor Daunton.
Yes, present.
Councillor Hogg.
Present.
Councillor Lynn.
Present.
Councillor Murphy.
Present.
Councillor Sharp.
Present.
Councillor Warren.
Present.
Claire George.
Present.
Edward Lee.
Present.
Thank you. I will now move on to the first item on the agenda, which is the appointment of the chairperson for the Cambridgeshire Police and Crime Panel. In accordance with the Rules of Procedure, Section 2, election of chair and vice chair shall take place annually at the annual meeting. Can I therefore ask the panel if there are any nominations, please?
Can I nominate Edward Lee, please?
Is there a member of the committee that would like to second the nomination?
I'm happy to second.
Are there any further nominations? In that case, I see no formal objections, so therefore, Edward, would you like to take the position of chairperson? And I even have... I can now hand over to you for the second item on the agenda, which is election of vice chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for your continued support for me as chair. So let's move on to the next item, which is nomination for a vice chairperson. I would like to nominate Councillor Sharp. Would anyone like to second that? Sorry, mine's gone blank, sorry.
Andrew.
So Councillor Lynn, sorry. Second. Were there any other nominations? No, in which case, welcome Councillor Sharp to you remain as Vice Chair. Thank you very much indeed. So item 3, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. I've had apologies from Councillor Tierney, Councillor Collis, Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Ali, and Councillor Murphy is here as his substitute.
Thank you. Do any members have a disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest they wish to declare? Could you please raise your hand? Okay, thank you. No interest to declare. Right, well, in which case I would like to welcome the new Commissioner who is attending on the screen, along with his Chief Executive, Jim Haylett, and our Monitoring Officer, Fiona Macmillan. Welcome to our meeting. So before we get to the main agenda items, we have the review of the last meeting's minutes. Are there any issues in the minutes that members would like to point out for clarification or amendment? Okay, so you are happy for me to sign the minutes as an accurate record of the last meeting. Thank you. It's not a vote for. It's only if it was not an accurate record. Yes. Okay. And can members please remember to use your microphone when speaking, as that will be going out onto the live feed. So moving on to the item 6. This was the letter that I wrote on behalf of the panel to government ministers, raising concerns about funding virtual meetings, and one other item which I forget what it was now. And we have the response from the Minister, Kit Malthouse, which sets out essentially justifying the government's position. I don't know if any members had any questions or comments on that. Councillor Murphy.
Yes, my comment, and I'm wondering whether the new Commissioner has a view on it, is should we pursue where there's been some agreement on with one of the fastest growing areas in population and therefore some crime in Western Europe is Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Wouldn't that be a good area to focus on to try and solve in some way this funding problem?
Do you want to come in?
Chairman, did the previous speaker have his microphone on? Because if he didn't, the Commissioner might not have been able to hear him.
Chair, I believe my microphone was on. The Commissioner might be muted. I'm just saying, if you look at the response and the questions that's been going on over several years on funding, there's an area there's some agreement, and that is focusing on how we can get an uplift in funding because of the growth in population, which is significant in this county. I'm not sure whether he's muted, and that's why we can't hear him.
Chair, I can come in on this point.
Please do.
So, in relation to the core grant, I think we all know it's an archaic formula, and it doesn't work for our county and many others. This is something I have lobbied already, both in discussions with the Home Secretary and the Policing Minister, and there is some commitment within this term of government to look once more at the funding formula. Notwithstanding, I am informed that this is a very complex matter to work through, but there is some commitment, and the panel can be assured that this will be high on the agenda whenever I'm having those conversations, both with our members of Parliament for their assistance in lobbying government and with ministers, because I agree our funding settlement is not fair and it's not where it should be.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I think the panel would like to offer its assistance in helping you make that and reinforce that point. Councillor Hogg.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. It seems that the funding of the police seems to, much in the same way that local government seems to be shifting away from central government funding and more and more on the precept for council tax. And on that basis, would it not be something that could be looked into as to whether or not a precept could be put onto business rates as well, on the basis that businesses have the same service from the police service as residents do, and it should be something that maybe both sides are feeling that burden?
So, Chair, from my perspective, I mean, that's obviously a matter of policy and something I would certainly take away and ask that question.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on this item? Claire.
Good afternoon. Given your stated commitment to partnership working, Commissioner, I wonder if there's any opportunities for partnership lobbying for additional funding, including perhaps strategic safety partnerships and maybe even elected MPs?
I apologise, I didn't get the last part of that question.
I wonder if there are any opportunities for partnership funding, so rather than just, as a panel writing in and challenging, are there opportunities for partnership funding to include, for example, strategic safety partnerships and our elected MPs?
Do you mean in relation to lobbying or searching for funds from partner agencies?
In terms of lobbying for additional funding or for fairer funding rather than additional?
Yeah, I mean, this is community safety, keeping people safe. That's not just a role for policing. We know that, and there's many other agencies who have statutory responsibilities. So I think we shout with one loud voice together.
Thank you.
Councillor Daunton.
Yes, thank you. In Mr Malthouse's letter, he mentions the carefully considering the approach to allocating officer numbers. And I think in the past, we've been told that, yes, we might have an increase in officer numbers, but we don't have the funding for those officers. So, for example, I think we were told that there was no funding for uniforms or lockers. I mean, please, would it be possible to go back to Mr Malthouse and say, giving us more officers without lockers and uniforms is really not very helpful?
I understand that the point of that question, I certainly haven't been informed of that particular issue by the Chief Constable. I mean, you can rest assured, Chair and panel members, I'll be making the very strongest case for as much as we can get from Central Grant.
Thank you, Commissioner. Well, as I say, I think the panel is looking to you to take leadership, but we are all prepared to play our part in reinforcing that message. Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. Just as an aside to the Commissioner, I think there was a lack of flexibility because of the way the funding came down and when it came down recently, and that meant that we had to do things to balance certain budgets. Would you be minded to look for more flexibility so that we could manage cuts to police community supports officers maybe better, and we didn't lose them earlier when they had a lot of experience, a lot of local knowledge, which was very important during the pandemic? I know that you did speak up for the need for police community support officers, and I'm wondering whether, if the funding was more flexible, we could retain more of them.
Thank you for that question. I mean, my understanding, I mean, clearly I was not Police and Crime Commissioner at the time of that decision. The money coming from Central Grant, some of that is ring-fenced around the police officer uplift. You know, that is government policy. In relation to the decision around police PCSOs and some of the other announcements were made, I've always been clear that is an operational decision for the Chief Constable. It's for the Police and Crime Commissioner to make resources available, set the strategic priorities, but it's for the Chief Constable to decide how they do that. So, you know, that decision was made. What I'm very keen to ensure is that alongside that, the neighbourhood policing model that the Chief Constable announced is effectively implemented, and I will be monitoring that very closely.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions on this item? Okay, then we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is public questions. Now, I believe we have 2 questions.
Hello, hi.
Welcome, Nikki Massey.
Yes, can you hear me all?
Yes, we can.
Brilliant, thank you. Shall I ask the 2 questions together, or do you want one and then the answer, then the second?
Commissioner, do you have a preference?
I really don't. I'm happy if you ask them both, and I will take them both.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Would the Commissioner support the 20s Plenty campaign and the campaigning by the Louis Royal Trust to reduce the speed of vehicles in urban areas in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough down to 20 miles an hour by including it in Vision Zero and working with other partners to achieve this as soon as possible? The benefit to life is obvious, but the lowering the number of accidents also has the impact on the emergency services, including the police. According to the 20s Plenty campaign, the number of police recorded casualties on Cambridgeshire roads was 1,646, with 648 of those on a 30-mile-an-hour road in 2019. In Peterborough, 629 were recorded with 307 of those on 30-mile-an-hour roads, totaling 2,275 in total, and of those, 955 are on 30-mile-an-hour roads. The cost of these collisions is 148 million for Cambridgeshire and 54.1 million for Peterborough, which totals an enormous cost of 202.1 million. of these costs will of course be police costs of attending the scene and of course to the cost to the health system and most importantly to people's lives. I would urge the Commissioner to add 20s Plenty in Division 0 and reach out to all partners including Peterborough Council for further support. And my second question, the Commissioner has implemented his police and crime survey for the public. However, notably absent is any reference to violence against women and girls and domestic abuse as a priority. How can the Commissioner assure the public that these will be one of his highest priorities while also noting the outpouring of women's triggered reaction to the way the Metropolitan Police handled the death of Sarah Everard by asking women not to leave the house alone at night? And the fact that harassment of women and girls is now a live issue that needs to be recognised as such by the police, and not by putting police officers in nightclubs, but by working with the nighttime economy and by talking to women's services to ask what more could be done to stop the years of abuse and harassment that causes so many women to feel afraid or concerned about walking alone at any time, day or night. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Commissioner.
Thank you. Those are two very important questions. Firstly, in relation to the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit in urban areas, I understand those stats you've given. They're shocking. They're shocking. Road safety was a priority for me during the campaigning, and now as Commissioner, it will continue. It will continue to be a priority, tackling the fatalities and serious injuries on our road. However, what I will say is that my personal view at this time is that 20-mile-an-hour speed limits are appropriate, and they're appropriate in certain circumstances, but not in all urban areas. And I believe this is in line with the Vision Zero partnership view, and that's supportive of the World Health Organization recommendation that indeed 20 miles per hour should be the maximum speed in urban areas where, and this is important, vulnerable road users and vehicles mix. So the evidence is showing us that 20 miles per hour obviously reduces injuries, etc. And this is reflected, I think, in a partnership strategy which is underpinned by the safe system approach and makes speed management a focus for safety. So my point is this: I'll be working very closely with the Road Safety Partnership, supportive of the Vision Zero Partnership, and where there is a good evidence to support 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, I will be supportive. But notwithstanding that, the actual responsibility still does lie with our local highway authorities, being Cambridge County Council and Peterborough City Council, who I will work very closely with to ensure our roads are as safe as possible. In relation to the second question, and tackling violence against women and girls, it is probably known to many panel members, my background is in law enforcement as a police officer. I have worked in many areas where I had direct contact in areas where we were tackling violence against women and girls. It is something very close to my heart. It's both a national government priority and has been consulted upon recently and was in fact the strategy is being released. But it's also a local priority for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And locally we have a partnership, VORG if I may call it that, strategy which sounds a core model of what all partners have committed to. An enhanced model which is delivered as and when funding is available. The Constabulary's commitment to tackling VORG has recently been bolstered, and that's with the introduction of vulnerability focus desks, which some of the precept money went towards paying for. And this increases the support and direction, which is really important, the support and direction for frontline officers, many relatively new in service, and it's helping them to be reactive in these investigations. Interestingly, the Constabulary has just led a series of focus groups. That's with third sector services to capture their views on what more can be done to tackle VORG. And this was part of the county's recent bid to the Safer Streets Fund due for next year, which works in partnership with the nighttime economy, key stakeholders, but has been helpful to ensure the views of all services follows a common narrative. In relation to my plan and the assertion that it's not mentioned in there, that's the initial themes going into consultation, and hopefully you will recognise that each one of those themes, VORG, domestic abuse, street harassment, child abuse, and all other types of crime, will run seamlessly. It will run seamlessly through each of the themes in my plan, and I can give you assurance, and I know that you are passionate about this as well, Nikki, it will feature very strongly in the police and crime plan.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for a full and detailed response to both of those questions, and I think we will obviously look to see how those are incorporated into the emerging police and crime plan. So thank you very much, Nikki, for asking those questions.
Thank you.
We have no further questions? No. So thank you. Now moving on to item 8. This is the oath of acceptance of office and the code of ethics that the Commissioner has signed on taking up office. We wanted to bring this to the panel meeting partly to make that commitment public and partly to put into the public domain what those commitments are. Now, we haven't included the word the oath or the code of ethics in the papers, but I would like to make a recommendation to you, Commissioner, that you publish both of those documents, or at least links to them, on your website, on your profile page on the Commissioner OPCC website, so that they are there for the public to refer to. But over to you, Commissioner.
Yes, so as you rightly pointed out, obviously the acceptance and the oath of office itself, it's a public document, and I'm happy to take that on board. And secondly, I took a further commitment, one that I don't need to, there's no statutory requirement, but this was that the signing up to the policing code of ethics. This is a set of disciplines which all police officers and staff sign up to. It's a statutory instrument. It's included within the regulations, etc. I am more than happy to do this. I am there to hold policing to account, and I should be at the very least aspiring to the same standards. I think they go above and beyond many other ethical standards for organisations, and I was very happy to sign up and very happy to make that public knowledge.
Thank you, and we welcome that further commitment to high standards in public office through signing up to the Code of Ethics of Policing. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, I just wondered, is it possible to slightly increase the volume that we're getting from the screen? Because the Police and Crime Commissioner is coming over with a very quiet voice. If everybody else is fine, then that's fine. I just wondered if anybody would like it up the volume a little bit.
Are IT onto that? Yeah, IT are onto that, so hopefully that will be resolved. Are there any other questions for the Commissioner on this item? No, thank you. So if we can just make that as a formal recommendation, that those two documents be published or accessible from the OPCC website. Would anyone like to second that recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Murphy. So if we could just note that as a recommendation of the panel. And now moving on to item number 9. This is the Police and Crime Commissioner's approach to formulating the Police and Crime Plan. So over to you, Commissioner, to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, you've all had the document, so I shan't spend too long on it. But I was keen to inform the panel on my future approach and indeed the residents of our great county. I've been clear that I see the primary role of Police and Crime Commissioner is to be the voice of the public that can then hold the Chief Constable to account for those local concerns and issues that the public have. There's only way that can be done, as far as I'm concerned, and that's by having a really good strategy around engagement. So I have hopefully started off my tenure, apart from the past 10 days, 9 days now, where I've been self-isolating, tried to make myself as accessible as I possibly can. That's both physically, whereby I inform the office to set at least one day a week aside so that I can actually get out to communities and talk to people, in their communities. That's really important. But we've taken on board a series of other things as well. Meeting with lots of partners including tackling some of those local priorities that came up on the election campaign, which I know also from some consultation we're doing at the moment. So, for example, I've had a meeting with cycle theft campaign groups, particularly in Cambridge, a meeting with local farmers, the NFU in Fenland, meeting those involved in the first round of the Government Safer Streets project to take forward some of the learning, speaking with numbers of local business representatives, and since this paper has been done, I'll host more other meetings, including a really useful conversation with a resident of South Cambridge this morning who wanted to give some concerns that she had on a policing issue, and I was most grateful to hear from those so that I can then take them back to the Chief Constable to ensure some action is forthcoming. So in simple terms, I want to be accessible, I want to be visible. I've had lots of engagement with media, but also very importantly councillors. So within my first few weeks of office, we've had roundtable events with each and every area, with the exception of Peterborough, which is happening tonight, where we've invited all parish, district, city, county councillors, and we've had some really good attendance, because these are the people that know their communities really well. They know the local issues, so it's really good for me to hear from them, and we've received some really excellent feedback. If I can move on, because in the same document, just to talk around the police and crime plan. I was really, really keen that what we did around this was not just go away and put my head down and come up with what I thought the priorities were. Obviously, before the election, I'd done that surveying, I'd been speaking to people in our communities on our doorstep, and I had a pretty good idea, which is why we came around with the themes that we did for consultation on the police and crime plan. But I was also keen that this wasn't a ticky box, get a survey out just to show that we've done that, but we put something out meaningful. So we put the themes together, and I think you've got them in the pack here as well, so I'm not going to go through those themes. But I was very keen to get the feedback of our communities. So we're getting a lot of that from the roundtable events, but we're also getting a quite a good sort of return from some of the reaching out that we've done. I think to set expectations, because this isn't one of those ticky box sort of survey monkey type surveys where you say, what crime is most important. We've actually gone free text, and I asked for that in consultation with the team, because that way we really get to the heart of some of the issues, and we're already beginning to see that. So this has gone out for consultation. It was a 4-week, and it ends in July. And when that comes back, we will obviously be using that to influence and to include some of that detail within the police and crime plan, which of course I will be sharing at every stage with the panel, and looking for your support in putting this together, a team effort in keeping our communities safe. I'll stop there because obviously you've had the information before.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any members have a question I'd like to ask? Councillor Murphy.
Thank you. I'm very encouraged by what I've heard and what I've read together, because we've had some informal discussions here, and your panel, I think, are in a good position of experience and knowledge to help you develop the strategy. And things like road safety we heard about earlier on, male violence, girl safety, can all come in that. But there are some wicked issues, and we think that the community safety partnerships could be better, that there could be better engagement. I'm wondering what steps you may take, perhaps with us and with others, to engage the hard-to-reach groups. They could be elderly people, they could be young people leaving care, they could be new residents, say from Eastern Europe in Wisbech and places like that. I'm just wondering whether there's any thoughts on how we can engage the hard-to-reach groups.
So thank you. Two more very good questions. In relation to community safety partnerships, I think they're key. They're key for some of the delivery and keeping our local communities safe. I think we know nationally and within our county that they're variable in how they operate. So one of the first tasks I set in motion was to get together with the chairs of the CSPs, the Community Safety Partnerships, and that's all diarised now, and it will be happening shortly. As you'll be aware, probably, Councillor, that previously there has been funding been made available from my office. I'm keen to look at how we can do that in partnership with CSPs to ensure that they're as effective as they possibly can be. Not least of which, down the line, we have new government legislation around serious violence reduction, a really, really important issue. And I suspect that the community safety partnerships will be an excellent delivery arm of some of the work that we need to take forward. So I'm really keen to support. I'm really keen to get the views of yourself and other stakeholders. And in relation to the second part of your question, those hard to reach communities, that's the whole point of the engagement. I don't know all the answers. I don't even know what all the problems are that we're trying to solve. But I know particularly our councillors with lots of engagement across the county, across the politics. They're all doing, many of them do a fantastic job in their communities. I would not be doing my job if I wasn't engaging with those and asking for your help.
Thank you. Councillor Daunton.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner, for your introduction of your approach. Just a small point. I note that the paper that we have in front of us was written in the third person, as if someone else has written it for you. But clearly, your explanation makes it clear that it is your own approach. My question really concerns how you're going to interact with councillors, with local government. And you did a very good briefing recently with parish councillors and others, and I just wonder if you would provide opportunities for councillors to meet with you on a regular basis.
Councillor, thank you for that question. The answer is a resounding yes. I think the events we've held, and probably they've been facilitated by being able to do it online, we've probably got better engagement. I will be looking to continue those, and we put some themes, some really good information out there as well. So I would want to continue those. There is another offer here as well that I will make. If any councillor would like me to come and meet them in their ward district division, where I possibly can, because I've already said we will be out as often as we can around the county. Where I possibly can and diary allowing, I will facilitate that, once again, regardless of politics. So I think I've answered in the last question. Engagement with our councillors is key for me for keeping our communities safe.
Thank you. I'd like to amplify Councillor Murphy's question about those hard-to-reach groups. That I think it will be important, and we'd like to see evidence going forward, and obviously in the report on the consultation, of the strategy used to reach some of those groups. So faith groups, ethnic minorities, travellers, homeless people, victims of crime, particularly victims of crimes which made them, made them difficult to approach. I mean, particularly, obviously, domestic violence, sexual violence, trafficking. To really trying to understand what are the problems that you can make a difference to with your strategy, but also reformed offenders. I mean, I think a key part of helping people who are released from prison not going back to crime is to understand what it is that makes a difference. And we've clearly, your predecessor identified not being able to go back to a home, and therefore bridging, working better with local authorities to find homes for people. But there are obviously other aspects of their lives which make a difference, and it's key that you understand and that you demonstrate that you can understand what you can learn from that. And also the organisations that you give grants to, clearly they too are working in vulnerable parts of the communities and can offer you useful insights. So I just offer that to you as something that we would encourage you to pursue. I'm sure you are already.
And Chair, if I may come back on that point, I completely agree with you that there's harder to reach communities and many others. Just hopefully a bit of reassurance for the panel, and I thank my team for this. With the consultation, we have reached out far and wide, and going back to the previous question as well, we've been ably assisted by some councillors on some of these who have those contacts already. So, for example, faith groups, we've gone directly to Peterborough Cathedral, Cam Central Mosque, Hindu Temple, Cambridge University Jewish Society, Travellers, One Voice for Travellers, and also sent, as I said, to a councillor who does some excellent liaison work. Homeless, the Lighthouse Centre in Ely, just around the corner from me, and the Light Project in Peterborough. Victims, I've got about 10 on the list here. I'm happy to send them. So, you know, the Bobby Scheme Refuge, PWA, Victim and Witness Hub, Family Action, and then coming back to your point, Chair, around, you know, rehabilitation. So people with lived experience of multiple disadvantage, the Sun Network, the Cambridge Co-Production Group, and they're, but to name a few. And I thank my team. They've reached out, but we're very keen to get this out as far and wide as we possibly can. And any help that you can offer me as a panel, because we still have a couple of weeks to go, would be much appreciated.
Councillor Lynn.
Hi, Darryl. Could we also possibly try and add the ferry project in Wisbech to that list somehow, as we do have a massive homeless issue in Wisbech, and the ferry project is doing a lot of work towards that. It would also be nice if at some point we could go and have a meeting with the CEO of the ferry project and have a bit of a chat with him and see where he can help, sort of thing.
So absolutely, Councillor, and if I could ask for your assistance, the survey is there, if you can get that to them, and I look forward to attending the great market town of Wisbech sometime in the near future.
Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. Two things. One is just a quick point about an earlier response that you gave, Commissioner, and that is you said one voice for travellers. Can I just alert you to the fact that you might need more than one voice for travellers, because in fact I'm sure you appreciate that within the traveller population there are a number of different groups who work quite independently. So just be I'm sure you're aware, but to be mindful that you might need to contact a number of those groups, the show people, the Irish travellers and the local indigenous travellers as well, as it were. Just to name just but a few. The other one is I just wanted to clarify, and do refer me, I'm a new member of the panel, so do refer me back if this is a not appropriate question to ask, but it would be really useful to know, you've said before that you're very clear about the boundaries of your work and that of the Chief Constable, and I just wondered to what degree you feel you can where your boundary for calling the Chief Constable to account stops, and where his boundary for being the operational manager starts or ends, as it were, where those two boundaries meet.
Thank you, and that is a good question, and I think that's confusing for many of us. I mean, I can recite the legislation. Obviously, the Chief Constable is operationally independent. I think the best way to describe this, I mean, obviously the Chief Constable must take account of the police and crime plan. But I think for the effectiveness of a police force and for the effectiveness of the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, there needs to be a professional relationship. So clearly there is a boundary set in law. I know that there is some work ongoing within a national review, government review, to clarify that as well, because I think, you know, realistically, across the country, sometimes those boundaries are crossed and kind of cause some conflict. What I can say so far, I believe this is a start of a very professional relationship with our current Chief Constable. That's not a friendship. That's a professional relationship. Very, very clear on that, and that hold into account mechanism. But so I probably best to give you an example around this. So rural crime is a priority for me. It's a priority because of the number of the percentage of rural area we have in our county. So it's a complete priority. But of course, I can't direct the Chief Constable to increase numbers of the rural crime action team. That's not within my gift, and nor should it be. You know, I'm not a police officer. He's the Chief Constable, gets paid lots of money, and knows what they are doing, hopefully. But as it happens in this case, he's looked at that and he's taken that away and found some resource to sort of bolster that team. And along with the sort of prevention that I can do in relation to things like the Countryside Watch, we can work together to improve the lot for our rural communities. That's just an example. So I think that the boundaries are set in legislation, but I think to work effectively, you've got to have that good working relationship.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. I mentioned to the Commissioner some of the wicked issues earlier on, and in the police and crime plan, I welcome the consultation that's going on, steps that will be taken to engage with hard to reach and work with us and other strategic partners. Obviously, we need to get on and do it. We can't talk about it all the time. Do you think there might be some scope for some targets occasionally in these plans? For example, earlier on you talked about 20's plenty and the need for the highways authorities to do their bit. I think the inference was to design roads that don't kill people. So if we wanted to keep death off Cambridgeshire and Peterborough roads, should we consider maybe setting a target for a reduction in the number of fatalities on the roads, and for the police service to work with the other local authorities to achieve that?
Councillor, that is a very good question, and it's one that I've been working through myself. As we work through the plan, I mean, I am a little bit concerned about putting metrics in, i.e. what it is we're baselining here, for example, and in particular when we talk about road safety, and under Vision Zero there is an aspirational target there. There's a number of aspirational targets there, and particularly with that Vision Zero strategy, I'm signed up to that, so that will find its way into the plan. I think where I stand on this is that I'm very open. I'm very open to those conversations, you know, and if there is some sort of evidence that target will actually make our communities safer, then I will certainly look at that. I am just a little bit nervous around just putting matrix in for matrix sake, but I'm more than happy to continue that conversation.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask you a little bit, Commissioner, about paragraph 7.1, where you say the Commissioner, you are fully aware of the need to be transparent and accountable, thus enabling scrutiny by the public. Now, one of the areas that you obviously, the main forum in which you hold the Chief Constable to account is in the Business Coordination Board meetings, which are private meetings. Obviously the minutes, the agenda and the minutes are published, but the meeting themselves are in closed session, which is not universal. Not all commissioners have those as closed meetings. I wondered if you had any thoughts about making those either open to the public, obviously to be excluded at points where sensitive information is to be discussed, or even possibly alternatively allowing people to attend by invitation, perhaps members of the panel.
Thank you, Chair. I will certainly take that away as a consideration. I have given this some thought, but in particular around the Business Coordination Board, I will take that as a consideration. But what I'd like to add, what I did come across when I was looking at the previous papers of that board, I personally wasn't reassured. The hold into account issue within there. There's some really good stuff, and the agenda set out, particularly around, you know, a lot of the strategic priorities of the force and some of the matrix. But the bit that's missing for me, most of the inquiries I get, the concerns I get, the issues I get, are of an operational nature. Strategically, there's stuff to be done there, and they'll find their way into my plan, so that the Chief Constable then will have to take account of that. But I'm very keen that we do public engagement and proper public engagement going forward. I've had an initial conversation with the Chief Constable, and I've seen this done elsewhere across the country, where we'll be looking to come to the district areas and hold public events. Hopefully they won't all need to be online. There'll be public events where the Chief Constable, and here's the thing, I'd like to make this a panel, because when it comes to community safety, keeping people safe, it's hardly ever just a policing issue. So if we can get local leaders, local authority leaders there as well. So this is in planning, and we're looking to put that in place as soon as possible.
Thank you. Councillor Bywater.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good afternoon, Commissioner. It's nice to see you at long last in a meeting. I've just got one question. First of all, I really like your approach. You've certainly come out of the gates, and it's been really good to see locally in my own ward and district of Huntingdonshire. I guess my question is just in relation to your position with the judicial system and your engagement with the judicial system, because we've seen cases recently in Huntingdon where the police have been absolutely superb in apprehending repeat offenders, but the judicial system have then subsequently barred them from being in a certain area, and then they've ended up in another area where they then carry on the problem. So I'd just be interested to see what your thoughts are in relation to your engagement with the judicial system, the court system.
So, Councillor Bywater, very good to see you again. I chair, as is my role, the Criminal Justice Board. That's a strategic board with all the leaders from Magistrates Court Service, Crown Prosecution Service, Probation Service, and we had our first meeting recently. I think more importantly, it's relationships with those regional directors, national directors of those agencies. I think if you're specifically talking about the judicial system, as in courts and judges, obviously we're in close contact with Magistrates Courts, HMCTS. I think when it comes individually to obviously judges, I'm aware of your background as well. I mean, obviously they'll have their own mechanisms and processes and places where policy is made. But I do take your point. I take your point entirely, and I think that the Criminal Justice Board is clearly going to be a key issue for me to chair going forward, and looking how we take some of those issues forward.
Thank you. I had a question, just a clarification. Paragraph 9 says Appendix A, emerging themes from community engagement. The Appendix A actually is your 5 core themes. I just wanted to clarify, was that what Appendix A was meant to be? There wasn't an addition? Okay, I see, Jim, you're nodding. Thank you. Okay, so I think in summary, the panel is strongly endorsing your approach to consultation to formulate the plan, and we are very much behind you on that. We would very much like to take you up on your offer to engage with us directly, and I'm going to suggest that we arrange some dates for some informal meetings. I would suggest that we try to get one in before the end of July, so that's before the end of your consultation period. But I suspect that not everyone will be able to make it to that, so it may be useful if we had a second one, perhaps at the beginning of September, given that August is going to be a difficult time to arrange anything. Would that be acceptable to you, Commissioner?
Yeah, yes, that would be good. That would be good.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, so is the panel happy to note this report? And thank you very much. Okay, so moving on to agenda item 10, which is the report on the impact of COVID on policing in Cambridgeshire. Obviously, this is more of a sort of historical report, but Commissioner, do you have any points you'd like to make from this, and particularly any points that you see as learning points going forward?
No, Chair. As you say, this is historical. I have had discussions with the Chief Constable. I think there's many learning points for our constabulary and nationally and I think that obviously come reviews, etc., some of that will be pulled out. What I will say to the panel is that clearly what we have seen in the past year or so is difference in both calls for service, the number of calls for service that we were having during lockdown. I think we would all assume that they would go down, and they did. Certain crime types, like those hidden crimes, the awful violent crimes, domestic abuse and things like that, probably went up a bit, whereas other crimes, the serious violence on the streets, went down. But as we come back to more normality, it will be interesting to see what those figures are telling us going forward. I think we know, as people have come out of almost a year and a half of restrictions, I think policing will face some challenges over the next few weeks, and we need to support the constabulary in making their way through that. So all in all, I think there are plenty of lessons to be learned. I think it's a good report by the constabulary, which gives us the information that we need, and looking forward, hopefully we'll certainly, when it comes to contingency planning, we'll be able to provide some useful information for the future.
Thank you. Councillor Daunton.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. I know that there's several local government organisations locally are working on COVID recovery plans. And I don't know if you've been contacted already about any of those plans. If not, perhaps you might be able to be active in contacting local government across the area with input into the local recovery plans.
Yeah, thank you. I do sit on the, and I forget the exact term of it, but it is the strategic leaders meeting. That's with the chief execs and the leaders from the local councils, the police, fire, rescue, etc. So I'm sure that that's being dealt with there as well. But I'll certainly take it away and ensure that's done.
Councillor Lynn.
Hi, Darryl. I know we've said that there has been a reduction in calls to the police regarding crime. I have a real fear here that this reduction in calls is not because of crime has been less, but because of people are unwilling to report crimes through the fear that they're not being responded to. I know we've spoke about this before, and I just want to ask, how do we fix this going forward? How do we start encouraging people to actually start reporting crimes again and make them feel like they are going to be protected or they are going to be responded to and things like that? Thanks.
So Councillor, I mean, this has always been at the heart of all those priorities I've always talked about, and it's about listening to local communities. It's about getting the police to act on local concerns, local solutions to local problems. That will feature heavily in my police and crime plan. I recognise, because you're not the only person who has told me this, and many residents will tell me this. I mean, if you report a crime or report an incident, you want to see some action taken, and then some feedback as well. And that forms a lot of my mailbag, where that possibly hasn't happened. So that's where I'll be holding the Chief Constable to account, particularly in that local policing area. I mean, there is a commitment, before I came into office, to bolster the local neighbourhood policing teams. I will be holding the Chief Constable account to do that, and hopefully that gives that bit more confidence and reassurance to our residents and business owners to report crimes, because they have to be reported. Because what I don't want to do is go to the Chief Constable and say, you have this problem, say in Wisbech town centre, of shoplifting, what are you doing about it? And they go away and look at it and say, well, actually we've only had one in the past 2 months. I understand that people aren't reporting on occasions, and that's always been the case, but we need to encourage our communities to do just that, so the police have the full picture so that they can act on those issues.
Brilliant, thank you.
Councillor Hogg.
Just kind of following on from that, really. It's my experience that the one-on-one calls can take half an hour to get a response, and it's my fear that there's a lot of people that just give up. Their battery might, their phone battery may die, and then they don't bother to report going forward. So I think it's about the inroads into. I noticed that there was a talk about how the web service has seen an increase, but 101 has seen a decline. And is that just because people have got so frustrated with trying to get through on 101, they've kind of moved to the web chat to get some sort of response? But I feel that there is a lot of fall off of people not bothering to report. We have locally we have a lot of car meets that cause a lot of problems with this high density housing with high rise apartment blocks in the very near vicinity, with literally hundreds of residents, and I've called up on 101 myself. And I've been told that there's only been 2 calls to service. And I literally cannot believe that there are only 2 people in those blocks that feel that there is a problem and it needs to be addressed.
So, Councillor, I mentioned I'd spent some time on the phone this morning, and it's a common theme because most of that was around the 101 and the service that this resident had got, which was frankly not good enough. This is a common theme, and it will be seen in the consultation. I mean, what I can say, because I have brought this up with the Chief Constable a number of times, and I also spent a few hours just a couple of weeks ago with what they call our demand hub. That's the place where the 101 sits and the 999 sits and the crime reporting sits, just to understand for myself what the issues are. The reality is this, and it is reality, that the response to 999 calls and the initial response to 101 calls is pretty good, and the stats will show us that. I don't have them right in front of me at the moment. It's the secondary bit. So you get triaged on 101. The operator will determine whether it's an emergency or what should happen next. But it's that second bit where there's clearly some issues, because I've heard this a number of times myself. So this is certainly something I will be holding the Chief Constable to account for. I know there are some things in train already. I know there was, they're recruiting more staff there, etc. But what I won't do is give an operational response at the moment. But clearly it's something I'm going to be holding the Chief Constable to account for improving that, particularly around that secondary call. Because the real issue is here. The real issue is that people have got to have confidence that they can contact the police. And coming back to the point I made before, and then something will be done. If you fail at the first hurdle, you can't actually make contact with the police, and people are disengaging, i.e. hanging up, or in some cases just not being put through to the right department. We just need to get that right. Now I know that the Chief Constable is aware of that, and it's something I'll be watching very closely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lim.
Yeah, can I just add to that this has to come in with funding as well. If we're to evidence that we need more funding, we need to evidence that there's a need for that funding. And if people are not reporting crimes, how can you use that to then put forward for funding?
Councillor, that's a very good point. When it comes to submissions for spending reviews across policing, etc., we need the information for the funding, and also it comes down to the Chief Constable. Obviously, the Chief Constable needs to know where to deploy their staff. If we have certain cities, towns, villages which have higher rates, then they can make those decisions based on that information. So it's vital that these reports are coming in. But both crime reports and intelligence. Intelligence is really important as well.
I think that point in particular that you just made about intelligence and the importance of the public supplying that intelligence is something we know, but I don't think the public do know, and they don't know because they don't get any feedback when they do. So they don't see the value in it. They just think it goes into a black hole and gets forgotten. So that's an important piece of messaging that I think you will need to lead on in encouraging the public to engage with the police. But actually, there also needs to be a really careful study of the user experience, because it is poor. I mean, for at least 20 years, it has been possible to have phone systems that tell you your expected wait time. 101 doesn't. So you just don't know whether you're going to get the call answered in 5 minutes or 50 minutes. And that really is, completely unnecessary. That is, the technology is there for that. And there are technical problems that mean that, for instance, the callback service doesn't work, or that you get cut off with even before your battery's gone flat. So these things matter, because if someone's experience is negative the first time they use it, then they're going to tell other people not to bother, and that's really pernicious. So I'm glad that that's on your radar, and as I've said to you before, this has been on the panel's radar ever since I've been on the panel. So it's a really important issue to follow through on and make sure we get right. And also being able to perhaps track better why people abandon calls, whether they transfer to online or whether they just give up. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. One other thing related to that, which I hadn't thought about until our Chairman raised that matter, is do you give any priority to feeding back to councillors? Because sometimes when I've been reporting items, I don't expect to be given any priority over a resident, but actually if we are reporting something of broader concern in our divisions, I'd like to think that the police did attempt to at least let us know what's going on. I appreciate sometimes operationally that might not be possible for reasons of confidentiality, but it would be good to know that something's being done and that it's being taken forward. And I'm just wondering if you can encourage the Chief Constable to look upon councillors as a source of useful information for them, rather than, that we would like out that kind of feedback. It would be helpful to us.
Councillor, I completely support what you're saying there. Obviously, none of us, including myself, don't want to be treated any differently or specially. That would not be right, and that would not be proper. But given your standing within the community, i.e., you are a servant of your local community, you are trying to do things. I think there is a real need for the police and your good selves, given the role that you're carrying out. That the communication is there. That's actually already a conversation that we've had with the force, because for me that sits very squarely with our local neighbourhood policing teams. What I do know, across the county, up and down across the county, there are already some good relationships with local councillors and their local policing teams. But I'd like to ensure that's the case everywhere where there's an opportunity, in essence, that all councillors know who to contact and have those conversations about issues in their local communities. And then those honest, conversations around feedback. And this comes back to the point that's been made several times. If people are actually told what's taken place or what's going on or what's planned when they can be, they feel more engaged. Residents and the communities feel more engaged, and then it's a win-win for everybody. So I will take that on board. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Lim.
Yeah, I just wanted to say on that, because that question came up, that I know that the Wisbech local neighbourhood team do send us, Wisbech Town Councillors, a report every month, and we do have a question, and that we have a section in our council where we can put questions to the neighbourhood police, and they do respond for the next meeting. So I know that we do have a level of communication open with our neighbourhood policing.
I just wanted to move on to another part of this report, which was paragraphs 5.72 and 5.73, which is about the officers' health. Two thoughts occurred to me. One is that officers are going to have more encounters with members of the public not wearing masks, and therefore are likely to be more at risk of contracting COVID. And I just wondered if you were aware that the measures were being put in place to protect officers. And the other one was about this sentence: early indications show more complex mental health and vulnerability may be emerging amongst police officers and possibly staff too. And it occurs to me that people who go into policing do it in part because it is a communal activity, it's a social activity, and increasingly police officers are being expected to work solo, and possibly being more home-based is going to exacerbate that, as well as the single patrol operation. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on both monitoring and helping the police in both of those on both of those counts.
I mean, I do. Obviously, it's for the chief constable. They're the chief constable's staff. But I care deeply that they are supported, because they're there keeping our community safe. I am aware that there's lots that's going on currently. Being part of the constabulary IT system now, I get all the stuff that comes out, particularly around well-being, particularly around PPE moving forward, etc., etc. And I think, Chair, you make a very good point. The reality is this: police officers are members of the public, and they are like all of us. Hopefully, because I was one of them myself. So, and I think that therefore they will reflect as a workforce what is going on elsewhere. And I think we've seen some increases. I mean, I don't have any figures nationally, but the police will generally mirror and represent the general population, because that's exactly what they are. So if we are seeing issues with mental health and well-being due to, in part, some of the awful things we've gone through over the past year or so, then that will be reflected in the workforce. And I'll expect the chief constable to do everything they can to ensure the workforce is as fit, both mentally and physically, as possible.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on this? On this report? So the panel is happy to note this report. Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item 11, which is the Police and Crime Commission's annual report. Now, clearly this is the report for the last year, and therefore predates new Commissioner, but I don't know if there's any observations you wanted to make on this report.
But no. For brevity, the report is there, and I'm happy to introduce it as I have in the forward. But as you pointed out, this was before my term of office. But may I just put on record, Chair, my thanks to the previous acting Police and Crime Commissioner, Ray Bisbee. I know Ray, and I know he was passionately committed to keeping our community safe. I know that, for a fact. But I also, maybe just the other thing I will pull out is that for the previous year, just on the point you just made about well-being, I want to thank, and I'm sure it's most likely on behalf of most of the residents of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, I want to thank all the officers, staffs and volunteers at Cambridgeshire Constabulary. They've continued to demonstrate great professionalism. They've been out on the front line, dealing with things, keeping us safe, when others haven't had to, and they've been putting themselves and their families at risk. So I just want to put a record, my thanks to both Ray and to the Constabulary for the work they've done in the past year or so.
Thank you, yes, and the panel has echoed that thanks at each of our meetings. Do any members have any questions on the annual report? Councillor Hogg.
So on page 52 of the report, it states something to do the full-time equivalents for staffing, and it says that the PCSO numbers have reduced by 6.29. Now, so I'm aware of at least 4 PCSOs that have gone from our area, the area that I cover, and kind of the areas abutting to that. And I asked a question of one of my colleagues, and I believe there's actually 7 PCSOs gone from the neighbourhood policing team south for Peterborough, which is more than the variance that's here. Have all the PCSOs from Peterborough gone, but all the PCSOs from the rest of the county are still in place? Or, it just seems to me that it looks like that Peterborough has taken the biggest hit for the reduction in PCSOs. I take on board that there's been 2 PCSOs that have been brought in from other areas to replace those 7, but there's still 7 that have gone from the complement, and this is saying 6. So maybe you could kind of explain the reason for that.
I see my Chief Executive has his hand up. As this was put together by the office, and those figures are from the constabulary, should I defer to the Chief Executive? Chair.
Please.
Thank you, Chair. Is everyone hearing me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I will confirm and update the panel. But I think the reality of that will be because of the moment in time these figures were provided. So this is for the 31st of March. And I'd strongly suspect that that will have been as a result of, you know, the whole consultation process that the Chief Constable ran with the PCSOs, and then the realignment of the remaining PCSOs with the neighbourhood policing teams. So I suspect that the 31st of March figure looks very different to the last few months. But as I say, I can certainly confirm that. And I also recall the Chief Constable saying that the PCSOs that were remaining would be allocated across all of the neighbourhood policing teams as well. So again, I suspect if there was initial disparity in terms of PCSOs leaving a particular area, it was only a matter of, you know, weeks perhaps before the spread was evened out, if you follow.
Okay, thank you. There was one further question, and that was to do with the PCSOs, and I'm guessing you may not be actually in a position to answer this, but it's my understanding that the PCSOs that left the force were all female officers, and the 2 replacements that came that are now embedded with the team are both male. So I just wondered if you know, if you could inform us at some stage what the breakup was of the PCSOs that were made redundant. Was it heavily female officers, and were more male officers left? I think that would be quite interesting to see.
Councillor, I think that question's probably rather more detailed than this panel is appropriate for this panel. And I think you're making a general point about diversity and inclusion within the force. And I think the Commissioner may wish to respond on his view on that and how he is ensuring that diversity is being maintained.
Chair, thank you, and happy to do so. This is a really significant issue around diversity, not just gender, but on ethnicity as well. It actually forms part of the conversation I've been having with the Chief Officer team, particularly around the new recruits and how we are ensuring diversity in the Uplift programme. I don't have the figures in front of me, particularly in the Uplift programme. There's some really good news there, particularly around gender. In fact, I went to a passing out, an attestment ceremony just a couple of weeks ago. I think over 20 odd new police officers being sworn in, and there were more females on there than there were males, which is good to see on account of the fact that will start to adjust the balance. I'm also assured by the Deputy Chief Constable that when it comes to that gender balance, Cambridgeshire Constabulary is far and above many other of the forces and improving. I think there's still more work to be done, maybe with some of the other, particularly BAME and some of the more hidden minorities, and I know that policing is struggling with that nationally, but that's something I will certainly be holding the Chief to account for, you know, strategically here in Cambridgeshire Constabulary.
Councillor Daunton.
Thank you. Commissioner, you might consider this an operational question, so stop me if you do. But it's really to do with the policing teams and whether it might be possible to ask the Chief Constable to give us all an update on the local policing teams. I know in our area we're waiting to hear for details. It follows on from the reorganisation, I think is probably an appropriate term, the reorganisation of the teams in relation to PCSOs, and not all those new teams have been made, the makeup of the new teams been made public or made available to us. So if it's appropriate, if you could ask the Chief Constable about that.
Councillor, I mentioned earlier, I think it is important that councillors are kept updated where they can. So I'll certainly have that conversation with the Chief Constable. Clearly, it is an operational issue, but one that, you know, if we want to work together to keep our community safe, I understand the reasoning behind it. So I will certainly have that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brandon.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. It's a related issue, and that was simply, as you said, the data perhaps in the report is perhaps not quite so up to date as would be useful, but I understand quite a lot of the PCSOs were actually re-engaged as commissioned officers. So it's just because we knew from the PCSOs how very valuable they were and how much local knowledge they had of our local communities, and so we were very sad to I personally was very sad to contemplate losing some of those PCSOs. So can you just clarify or ask the Chief Constable, perhaps as part of the update that Councillor Daunton has requested, which of those PCSOs will be have been re-engaged as commissioned officers? Thank you.
Councillor, I will certainly take that away. I mean, you're quite right. The Chief Constable did brief me that he made a commitment that where there were some PCSOs who applied to be warranted police officers, he'd be looking to put them back into those neighbourhoods that they successfully carried out their PCSO duties, which is great. You know, we keep that organisational memory. I'll take that away, and I will speak with the Chief Constable. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think I should just say that although there is a strategic angle to this, these are questions that possibly should be directed to the Commissioner privately rather than through the panel. Are there any other questions on this? There was one question I had for you, Commissioner. There's a reference to the fact the OPCC has engaged a clinical psychologist to support the Victim and Witness Hub, or the people who are providing support through the Victim and Witness Hub. And it puts me in mind of the fact that there is a growing backlog of Crown Court cases, the serious cases, and therefore there's a growing number of victims and witnesses kind of in the system who have not yet reached a resolution and therefore require extended support. I just wonder what your observation was on the level of resource you have available to provide that support, and whether you feel that it's sufficient given the growing demand.
Thank you for that question, Chair. I mean, I don't have the figures in front of me. I mean, actually, what we have seen is less court cases, but you're quite right, longer waiting times. I mean, I had personally visited our victims hub, and certainly there's been no reports of resource issues there, but there's also other services like the witness services as well. So I certainly it hasn't come across my desk that they're struggling resource wise, and as I say, I won't make assumptions, but cases have gone down, so that may well have balanced it out. But I noticed my Chief Executive has a hand raised, Chair. Can we defer to the Chief Executive to see if they can shed any more light on this?
Certainly.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, as the backlogs progressed through COVID and it became more apparent that it was going to take some time to reduce, we, as an office and the acting commissioner, did speak to the constabulary to discuss the staffing levels in the Victims and Witness Hub, because, as you say, whilst there were in some ways less new victims because crime was declining, the victims and witnesses that we were supporting, we were having to support for longer and will have to support for longer. as a result of that, the acting commissioner did allocate additional money for additional support within the victim and witness hub. And as regards the clinical psychologist, that was partly for a training course for staff to help them recognise mental health issues within the people they're supporting, but actually also to advise them in case management with those people as well.
Thank you for that clarity. Are there any other questions on the annual report? Not seeing anyone, so you are happy to note the report then. Okay, thank you. So moving on to the next item, which is the succession planning and the government recommendation regarding appointing a deputy. Commissioner, I don't know if you've had any thoughts yet on whether you will be appointing a deputy and how you will fulfil the government's request on succession planning.
So, Chair, in brief, yes, it's my view that I will be appointing a deputy. That's still to be decided. It was always my intention to get into the office, understand the job, understand the strengths and weaknesses of both the office and myself, and then to make that appointment based on the knowledge of carrying out that role for a short while. So it's my intention to appoint a deputy, not least of which it looks very much so it's going to be mandated in any case, so the choice would be taken away. In relation to the second part and succession planning, in the interim, and we will be responding to the Minister, we will be applying the current legislation, which obviously this will come via the panel, but there is precedent been set where the Chief Executive could take up those duties for a limited time set. So the answer is yes, I will be looking to get a deputy, not least of which it's been mandated, and yes, we do have succession planning going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Murphy.
Yes, I wanted to raise a couple of things on this, and thank you, Commissioner. You've pretty much answered the main question about legally, what is it? I think I understand it is if somebody is on your office's payroll, they can be part of the succession plan, or if there isn't a succession plan, they can succeed. I think last time it happened, had a decision been made a week earlier, we would have had a by-election. The Minister has focused on COVID, the Minister of State in his question. In the penultimate paragraph, it does ask that you engage with this panel on that plan. I think I would be right in believing it's not mandatory that you have to have a deputy. For example, you could decide you would have associate commissioners, and they may look at geographic issues, gender issues, topic issues, and paid a nominal fee. You don't necessarily have to have a deputy, but please continue to share with us your thoughts and the thoughts of your office on how this could go forward. And I would ask that you do consider the use of associates to the police commissioner to progress the work of making the police service even more relevant, efficient, effective and economic in its the way it carries out its duties.
So thank you, Councillor. I will certainly take that on board into my thinking. I know my Chief Executive has a hand up, Chair, if I can bring the Chief Executive in.
Indeed.
Yes, just on that last point, the legislation indicates that the panel appoints a member of existing paid staff. The legislation covers for a deputy, if appointed, actually becomes a member of staff. So a somewhat different employment model to the PCC, but in effect the triggering of an election, it doesn't make any odds whether currently with the legislation whether a deputy is appointed or not, or whether we have to revert to the existing legislation of the panel just appointing someone from the staff. Thank you.
Did you have any specific response to Councillor Murphy's question about associate? So it's kind of part-time, I suppose you might say, specialist appointees.
Yeah, I think this is why I've held off to date, because I want to know where the gaps are, where the strengths, where the weaknesses are, and then the art of the possible moving forward. I don't just want people on the payroll for the sake of it. You know, we want productivity in keeping our communities safe. So I'll certainly take that on board, and I will look at that. To me, we see up and down the country some different names given to these roles, and maybe deputy isn't that helpful. But I will certainly take that on board going forward.
If I could just, by way of a supplementary, I think that's really good. The letter from the Minister says 6 months, so we don't have to rush this. And if you think it might be better to have people offer a different name, a different remuneration, to take account of some of these factors, I think that would be a great idea. I mean, it could be a nominal sum somebody gets paid, a few £1,000s a year, to take up a remit for engaging with hard-to-reach communities, older people, rural issues, or whatever, domestic violence or strategic issues, and you can change them over years, and they could convene reports and particular work to be done for you and us, and there could be a pool of people there to be considered if a succession was needed. But I see that you've signed up to the codes, and actually that's a pretty good succession plan in our experience. If you're going to behave in a good code, etc., etc., it's unlikely that we will need to succeed you.
Thank you, and I certainly wouldn't be in a position, but of course it's not just about the codes and the practice, but obviously there are other things like health issues. But hopefully I'm fighting fit and looking forward to my 3 years in office.
Can I just get clarity on whether a commissioner can make more than one political appointment? I mean, perhaps Jim, you can.
No, the legislation says that can make one political appointment of the deputy, but doesn't make provision for any further than that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bradnam.
Sorry, as a new member of the panel, I was just interested in the comment at the end of the letter from Kit Malthouse, which says, I'd also ask that you involve your police and crime panel in those discussions as necessary, given their statutory role in this process. And I just wondered if anybody could explain the statutory role. Thank you.
Well, the statutory role is that we confirm the appointment, so the commissioner nominates, and we don't conduct an interview, but we conduct a hearing, a public hearing, to verify their appropriateness for the position. But I guess the question actually for you, Commissioner, is are you minded to involve the panel in perhaps drawing up the job specification and in selecting candidates?
At this time, that's something I will take away with me. I mean, this is a political appointment. It's an appointment I can make. Clearly, I want to do this in consultation with yourself. So I will certainly take that away in relation to sort of job specifications, etc., etc. But I haven't given it my final thoughts yet. But I will keep you updated, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any further questions on this item? Okay, so then moving on to item 13, decisions by the Police and Crime Commissioner, most of which decisions I think are going to have been by your predecessor. But are there any decisions here that panel members would like to seek clarification on? Okay, so we're happy to note the report. Thank you. I'm actually going to move the next item up the agenda. So actually item 17, the task and finish group, I'm going to move up because I think it would be useful to have you still with us, Commissioner, but we won't need you for the final points, which are really panel business. So I'm going to hand over to Claire George to present the findings of the task and finish group, which makes various recommendations about how the panel should operate or consider operating, and clearly our relationship with the OPCC is an important component of that. So hopefully you can see the presentation, Commissioner.
It's not come up on my screen as yet, Chair.
If you could let us know when it does, the IT.
Yeah, we have part of it. I think that will probably suffice. For some reason, it's kind of we're just in the middle part of the slide. But I think we can work with that.
Commissioner, can you see the presentation in your agenda pack?
I'm just looking for it now. I can see most of that, so I'm sure we can proceed on the basis of what I've got on my screen in front of me.
Okay, so over to Claire George. So, Commissioner, we're just getting set up.
Thank you very much. I'm just putting the full PowerPoint up on my laptop screen. So the full panel decided, I think as long ago as December, that it would set up a task and finish group to have a look at the way in which the panel functioned, to look at the strengths and to look at for areas for development, and to come up with some recommendations through that process as to how the panel might strengthen its effectiveness. We engaged the services of the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, if I got that the right way around, as an external body to come in and have that external view. And through that process, they did telephone interviews with every member of the panel. They observed some meetings, and they spent some time talking with the task and finish group. And what we really wanted to do was to be able to develop the challenging and the constructive scrutiny. We wanted to feel that we were adding greater value. You'll have seen through the pack of papers today, and I think it's fair to say there was a level of frustration within panel members that actually we feel our ability to influence, to add value, to do some of the support as well as the challenge, we actually needed to be involved at an earlier point, to be more proactive when actually we'd settled into quite a reactive sort of way of functioning. So in engaging that external company and with the cooperation of all the panel members, what we've done is put together a presentation which is really the kind of the headlines, the highlights. So the overall review findings, there are no critical issues with the panel. Many members are very passionate about ensuring better outcomes for the safety of their communities. To further develop the impact of the panel, there are a number of interlinked areas for development identified together with some improvement actions. And the areas for development were identified through the external provider. They put forward some suggested recommendations, and the task and finish group have refined those up to the point that they're being presented to you today.
Sorry, Chairman, could I just, sorry to Claire to interrupt you, could I just check we are seeing the same slides that you are speaking to? And I mean the actual slide that you're speaking to, that we've caught up with your presentation.
Okay, so no, I am on slide number 5, I'm really sorry. Sorry? Sorry. I get so used to doing things for myself. You see, it's the teacher in me. I apologise. I sit on my hands.
So what is the title of the slide?
It says Area 1. It's the one that you have on the screen in front of you. Sorry, I was reading off mine. So what the external provider identified was around there was still some need for clarification of the panel's role and responsibilities, the role of the panel in holding the Police and Crime Commissioner to account and enhance public accountability of the police force. That element of it is well understood. However, in practice, challenge can focus on operational matters, leading to scrutiny of the Chief Constable more than the Police and Crime Commissioner. I think it's fair to say, Commissioner, up until today, we have had the Chief Constable present at, I think, just about every panel meeting up to this point. So there's been on screen sometimes that deference of, can I just please then pass that question over? So in terms of recommendations, some clarification, further clarification through training of exactly what constitutes strategic and operational issues, and the nature of scrutiny to consider not just the actions, the what's been doing, but the impact, the so what of those actions. And I think it's been refreshing this afternoon to hear you, Commissioner, draw some real clarity in terms of the boundaries between where you see your role and the Chief Constable's role. The Task and Finish Group are putting forward a recommendation to cease the practice of having the Chief Constable at all panel meetings, although obviously we recognise the need to develop a clear and effective relationship with the Chief Constable. So to have him present at some meetings, but also maybe to find other means, such as informal briefings, to develop that relationship. There's also a recommendation about creating a panel protocol. So we have, and I think we're going to look at a little bit later on this afternoon, our sort of structure and processes, but a protocol that was a little bit more operational in terms of how we would seek to work in partnership with the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner to, for example, set work plans, set agenda items, be very clear about the issues that we would like reports on, so that everybody is using their time wisely. Next slide, please, Jane. Oh, wait a minute, I'm looking at the wrong thing. So in terms of Area 2, that was the relationship between the panel and the Police Crime Commissioner. Clearly, we're all recognising it's very important to have a culture of trust, transparency and mutual respect, that exchange then can be open and candid and should be one of effective support as well as challenge. Positive engagement between the panel and the Police and Crime Commissioner, vital in re-establishing relationships that are conducive to that effective scrutiny. So the Task and Finish Group recommendations from that, or within that area, around creation of a panel protocol which covers the practical workings of the panel as well as the cultural dynamics and the expectations of those dynamics, and other development actions that we'll come on to in a minute, which would seek to rebalance that power dynamic to make sure that it is a proactive, purposeful relationship. Next slide, please, Jane. Area 3 was around collaboration and commitment. Members recognising the importance of strong and productive working relationships, and that scrutiny is most effective when it is cross-party and an equal voice is given to all. There has been, it's fair to say, there has been a mixed level of engagement. There have also been some changes within the panel, so that lack of continuity we need to recognise and work with, and that all members have a duty to prepare for, effectively to attend and to contribute to meetings and work towards shared goals. In terms of recommendations, Task and Finish Group would recommend the development actions contained throughout this presentation and identified in other areas which are intended to refresh commitment and enthusiasm, build on existing skills and further develop knowledge and expertise relevant to the role. Next slide, please, Jane. In terms of panel focus, there was a feeling from the external provider the panel would benefit from a clearer focus on strategic issues, particularly those where it can add value and have influence. For the majority of substantive items on panel agendas, there's no clearly articulated outcome required. Much of it is for the panel to note rather than support the development of. So the panel are asked merely to just sort of sign things off, or we end up asking questions about things that actually have already been decided. And what the impact of that means that the panel has reduced opportunities to add value and to be of support. So the recommendations around this area: panel needs earlier access to information, greater involvement in the process of developing and reviewing the police and crime plan. The panel should focus on cross-cutting issues affecting communities and request information that is fit for purpose. Agendas could be shorter to allow more time for focused discussion, with other papers, such as we've received today, being issued for information. Next slide, please, Jane. In terms of work programming is key to ensuring the panel stays focused on strategic issues and those where it can make an impact. Greater collaboration with the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office, using the Police and Crime Plan as a basis for forward planning and setting priorities is required. Work programming needs to be member-led, ongoing and regularly reviewed. In terms of recommendations, the panel will benefit from an agreed process to select topics for scrutiny. The panel will benefit from an annual workshop to develop a work plan and create agendas to prompt requests for information from the OPCC. The panel would benefit from developing smaller interest groups around particular themes within the Police and Crime Panel and the work of the Police and Crime Commissioner. Next slide, please, Jane. In terms of meeting preparation, important that the panel receives the right strategic information in order to be able to sufficiently support and challenge the Police and Crime Commissioner. The practice of effectively what currently happens, the recycling reports that are provided to other meetings for other purposes or for those of noting or information, should be avoided. Those updates can be sent to members outside of the meeting. This leads to missed opportunities for panel members to work as a team, follow clear guidelines of inquiry or pose insightful questions. All those things we would seek to be improving. In terms of recommendations, implementing development actions all through, all the suggested actions in other areas should ensure that the panel has the right information to prepare for and deliver effective scrutiny. Development of interest groups would further increase focus, support and challenge. And actually in our pre-meet today, we did, as a means of introducing ourselves, talk about those things that actually as individuals we are passionate about, those particular interests that we bring to the panel. And not surprisingly, you know, there's quite a mix of expertise around the table, a mix of interest, all of which support Police and Crime Plan objectives. Next slide, please, Jane. In terms of member development and diversity, members need a clear sense of what's required of them, as well as the opportunity to make a difference. And I think it would be fair to say that every member of this panel has, you know, sought to participate in this because we do want to make a difference to our local communities and within our special areas of interest. The reactive nature of the relationship between the Police and Crime Commissioner and the panel, together with the presentation of information that is not fit for purpose, has eroded interest, enthusiasm and focus, and therefore undermined potential value and impact, areas that we really seek to address. In terms of recommendations, the Task and Finish group feel the panel will benefit from refresher training to address gaps in knowledge and to further develop identifying strategic priorities, work planning, questioning and scrutiny skills. The panel would also benefit from greater diversity of representation and participation. Next slide, please, Jane. So in summary, Task and Finish group, what we feel that we need to do is move from our current reactive position where we receive recycled information to a much more proactive position where we establish a fresh approach to work and relationships with the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner and the Commissioner himself, in the spirit of providing open, respectful challenge, scrutiny and effective governance, owns the work planning and drives meeting agendas which hold the Commissioner to account for the impact of the Police and Crime Plan, request relevant information and reports that are fit for purpose and support effective scrutiny, but also allow the panel opportunities to influence and add value, reinvigorates and re-enthuses members to further develop their knowledge and confidence and capacity for focused scrutiny. Next slide, please, Jane. How we feel we can approach that and start to actually develop and implement some of these recommendations. The panel has an excellent opportunity with the arrival of a refreshed membership. It's our first meeting today, and a new commissioner to build better relationships and engage in more effective scrutiny and governance. The group proposes to hold a training day with support for this, from the Centre of Governance and Scrutiny in September, and we do have a provisional date for that. And within that training day, what we'd seek to be incorporating are all these previously shared development actions. So to just revisit the core role, purpose and function of the panel, to reset the relationships between the panel, the Commissioner himself and the Commissioner's office, to seek some clarity of strategic and operational issues, where those boundaries are, what is and is not appropriate, to develop our scrutiny skills, including questioning, how to add value, have influence and impact, the methodology for selecting priority topics. So if we want to drill down into something, how do we actually choose as a panel the topics and areas of interest? To develop a work plan to set agendas and request out of that, then we would request reports that are then fit for purpose, ensuring everybody's time is most appropriately and effectively spent, and to consider the development of interest groups. And out of all of that, to develop the framework for a protocol, which the Centre for Governance will support us with and then write up for us to use. And to also include a workshop session to apply all of that learning to the draft Police and Crime Plan, in order that we can actually then already start to implement some of this. So have a work plan for the following year from September onwards. Last slide, Jane, I think that's it really. Okay, so we bring these recommendations to the full panel today. Happy to clearly, between us, the panel, the task and finish group, sorry, to take any questions. And as I've already said, we do have a provisional training date of Monday the 27th of September. Provisional date, we haven't determined a venue yet because the date is provisional. So we recommend those outcomes to you. Thank you.
So, Commissioner, we will have a continue our discussion about this, and you don't have to stay, but I just wondered if you had any initial response to that presentation.
No, thank you very much. A very comprehensive piece of work that's been done there. Notwithstanding any sort of legal or statutory requirements, you know, I'm very keen to support, you know, this going forward and have the best possible relationship we can, so that we both fulfil our functions effectively. Nothing leapt out to me as being something that cannot be accommodated and that we should be working together on. Clearly, when it comes to sort of the statutory bit, I'll defer to my chief executive, but I'm happy to work with you moving forward.
Thank you. Jim, obviously we as a panel depend very heavily on your staff for producing our reports, and so we are mindful of the fact that any forward planning that we do, we need to do in consultation with you. So we will be talking with you about how we do that, and starting with some informal discussions about how we begin to do that planning together. I don't know if you had any particular thoughts as well.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Chair. I was making a few notes as we went through, so it's you know, not for now for us to have the discussion, but resource for my office was the thing that I wrote down first as I was hearing it. So of course, you know, there is also something for me. Key role of the Chief Inspector is ensuring that that relationship between the PCC and the Chief Constable operates effectively. And one of the ways I do that, or support them in doing that, is around making sure everyone is crystal clear in terms of roles and responsibility, and that issue of operational independence that the Commissioner talked about earlier in the meeting. So, and I would seek to take the same approach when it comes to the relationship between the Commissioner and the panel. So, as I say, it's probably, as I say, not for us to talk through now, but as I say, we'll see what your deliberations come up with, I suppose.
Okay, and we will, as I say, we will involve you at an early point in those discussions. Okay, so you're welcome to carry on with us, but you've probably got more important things to be going on to, so unless you wish to stay, then you're welcome to leave at this point and the panel will carry on. But thank you very much indeed, Commissioner, for your contributions today, which we have found to be very helpful, and we welcome the brevity of your and accuracy of your responses. It's very, we're very, very grateful for it. Yes, Councillor Bradnam.
Just a practical word before we go on to the next part of the meeting. Would anybody like a comfort break?
We'll get to that. Councillor Daunton.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Claire for leading us in the task.
Sorry, does this need the Commissioner to be here, or? Okay. Did I just finish my thanks to you, Commissioner and Jim, that you're welcome to leave at this point.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the panel. I look forward to working with you as you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Daunton.
Apologies, Chair. I thought they had already left. Well, first of all, I want to thank Claire for leading us in the Task and Finish group. Really doing an excellent job. So thank you very much. And also to thank Jane for supporting us while we were meeting and in between. I think it was myself, Scott and Alan. One of the things I think came out of it was really important was the reports that we receive from the office, and you've just picked up on that, I think, Edward, haven't you? And I don't know whether this will become an issue of a resource for them, but for me it's really important that we get reports in the papers that we can get to grips with and that are relevant to our work. And I think one of the big drawbacks in the past is that we've had BCB reports that have been unedited and full of jargon, and actually it's been very, very difficult to see the wood for the trees. So I hope that we can really pursue that point, but I'm just wondering whether it's going to be a resource issue for the office.
Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think there are a few issues. Obviously, we touched on the Chief Constable and Claire attending, and Claire mentioned that certainly he's got to be at the budget meeting, and probably maybe one other. So we need to try and be collaborative with him. I understand why we're trying to do it, and we discussed it to avoid all operational questions and maybe the Commissioner deflecting those then to the Chief Constable, but probably, you know, it's a balance between the two. I think in the past as well we've relied upon what I would describe as recycled business board papers, which have basically just been topped and tailed, or in some cases have been produced, and they were produced a few months ago for a business board meeting, and time has moved on. So I understand it's a resource issue, and I could see and hear from what Jim was saying that he views that as a resource issue. But it's one that we obviously need to be aware of. And I think in the past as well, and as I said informally beforehand, the acting, you know, having the acting or interim deputy or acting, whatever we want, Ray, and obviously COVID has meant in the past we've sort of tried to programme within the year, like victims, we think communities and things like that. We tried to have one sort of topic big topic that we majored on for each meeting that sort of built the agenda around it, and perhaps we maybe go back to looking at the various comments that came out earlier from us when we all had our different sort of areas that we felt were important, all important, but all coming from different angles. We maybe try to build a work programme around that and bring those out, and again get the relevant people in to actually who we can influence and talk to. That's just my sort of thoughts about it. But as the other Claire said, Claire's done a great piece of work on this. She's put a lot of time into it, and thank her for it.
Thank you, Councillor Bywater.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Echo the comments. It's a great piece of work. Thank you very much for the effort that you put into it. You've probably said a lot of the points I was going to pick up on, but I think a lot of things we've also got to be realistic about resource and what we can do as councillors as well, because we've all got different commitments. And there's a terminology that I use quite a lot in business is about we mustn't try and boil the ocean here. Let's focus on some key issues that are pertinent to us, that we can drive that enthusiasm, and really focus on some of the key aspects that we want to tune into and what we want to address, really, because otherwise we'll end up with lots of stuff and we're not particularly effective, whereas I'd much rather be a bit more focused on some of the stuff, really. That would be my view. But great piece of work, and I support the recommendations. So.
Are there any other comments or questions? Councillor Dunn.
As someone who is pretty new to the panel, I'm glad that we have come up with a training. And will that be annual training, or is that?
I'm going to tell you what I think, and Jane will tell you the bits. So I think in relation to this piece of work, what we felt we ought to have was some refresher training that said, okay, is your remit, these are the things that you can't do, ask about, talk about, these things that are perfectly feasible. And I think the introduction that Edward did this earlier on has actually, there are a few, so there's domestic violence, women and children vulnerable, and there was a lot around community safety, and there has to be a strand around funding. Those perhaps are for the first year, those are probably, they could be our panel priorities, and 2 or 3 people want to have got particular interests and skills, and whilst we need to develop our skills and knowledge, we're all here because we bring particular things. And certainly my skills haven't been used. I've been here nearly 4 years, no, 4.5 years, and I'm just like, you've got that, really could. I think in terms of resource, we do have to, sorry, let me finish the training one. What we've got in our heads working with in Parry, and I think it will be a pretty full-on day, but what we've sort of got in our heads is that we do the morning sort of responding to these areas and reshaping ourselves, and who's interested in what, and then actually in the afternoon, and there may be consideration to have the chief exec and the commissioner and even the chief constable involved in elements of the afternoon, but to spend the afternoon looking at what will probably still be a draft plan by then, and actually saying these are our 3 or 4 strategic panel priorities, where do they fit in the plan, and actually what are we going to ask about, how are we going to scrutinise, where are we going to look at the impact and add value to those particular things. And then I think it will be hard work, but I think we ought to then be able to come up with the work plans and the kinds of information that we would like. And while we're doing that, the Ian Parry from the centre will then support us writing that protocol that says these are the ways that we would like to work with the new commissioner. So there was something in the minutes from Ray Bisbee, there was a bit of a comment, and I did there was a bit of a comment in there around the panel might want to develop their support function. We've done a lot of challenge and scrutiny, but we could develop our support function. We can't do that unless we're coming at these issues a little bit earlier in time, so we actually can add the value that this panel brings. And I think that would be what we were seeking to do. So to respond to the training element of it, there'd be some specific training to deal with the outcomes of this, but I think moving forward there would be a recognition of annual training. And actually I think we normally have annual training, don't we? I think it's only COVID that's completely knocked us out of kilter.
I think, yeah, usually we use Frontline, and obviously the new people have undergone an induction session online. The impression that we got from last time, and COVID, yes, has had an input, is that we didn't want to put some of you members that have been here for some time and go through the same old training each time, and I wouldn't say are fed up, but you hear the same thing each time. So they are now doing a lot more on, if there is a particular item of training, whether it be asking questions on scrutiny or anything in particular that you would want, they can put together now and they can do it online. So even if it was just for our panel, they can do it. So if there was anything that you particularly wanted, I can arrange it. If you wanted a day together, but it would have to be something in depth that you won't want to be going over the same thing again. And that's what I think might happen if we do it again. So I was kind of waiting for this to come to fruition, to see exactly what it was that we were missing before I went ahead to book anything and go further afield. Frontline is still there. I still speak to Dave regularly about training. So it's there and we can use him. And actually, talking about training, I do have to mention a date, because there is a conference date as well that's come up only last week. So they're there, we can use them. So if there's anything that you think of that you want training in that somebody else maybe hasn't even thought of, tell me and I'll get it sorted. But for this, yeah, we use Ian definitely for this, because he knows exactly what we want and what we need to get out of this. And I do think also for this, it's good to get an outsider's view. I think Dave probably knows us all too well, and we need those fresh eyes on because of what we're doing is so fresh. We need those fresh eyes to get this part done, even if we don't use them again in training. I mean, he might be brilliant, who knows, and we'll go from there. But for just this bit, we do need to use them and then see where we go from there.
And I think, to be fair, in Parry, I don't know whether he had a colleague that did some of the interviews, but in preparing the report, they've spoken to all of us. So they've had our very individual takes on, this is how long I've been doing it, this is what frustrates me, this is what works well. So I think he's got all of that in the background as he's going to support us to put a training activity together.
They even spoke to the Commissioner's office, so they've spoken to Jim, they spoke to Ali as well. So they've got it from both sides. So,
well, from that description, really, you would not need it every year anyway, would you? You'd only that training would be appropriate for Daryl's term, really, wouldn't it? And then you would probably only, if he changed his plan or something else, that one training would probably cover that whole. Yeah, thank you.
I'm mindful of that we did have a request for a comfort break, and we have gone to past. So I'm just going to take a 5-minute time out, and then we'll carry on, if that's okay.
Could we just finish in terms of, is everybody happy to do a training day on the 27th of September? Because we need to be able to confirm that, I think, with Ian.
Councillor Murphy.
I know you've asked for a comfort break, but we've talked, I think it may be because we need a comfort break. We haven't actually looked at the recommendations. There's quite a few of them would benefit there, so they're a bit, they're not directions, so it's okay. We could leave officers to do that, and clearly it says we need a venue for the training day. Who's going to organise it? You know, do you want the comfort break, or do we want to go through the recommendations now and then have the comfort break?
The venue I will sort nearer the time. It's September, the end of September. Who knows exactly what's going to happen? There is already a meeting being held here, if that's what's happening. Presumably we can go remotely, although I wouldn't want to, but I don't know what's going to actually happen there. I'm going to have to play that one by ear, so I would have to let you know, but it would be nice to fix the date regardless. I'll find somewhere. So it is a Monday, yes.
Can I just, does any members of the panel want a comfort break at this point? Yes, okay, so we will continue discussion on this item in 5 minutes. 5, sorry, not 6. Okay, so just continuing our discussion about the recommendations from the Task and Finish group. Councillor Murphy, I think you had some suggestions for either amendments or...
Yes, thank you, Chair. So there are the recommendations in there, and I'm not sure what people think of them, and there's one clear timetable recommendation about this away day event, which I think we should support and let the officers and people that participated in the task group determine that. But I would also like to add that we make use of Zoom facilities to have briefings, will be discussed elsewhere, as they can contribute to proactive work, which I think is the key outcome of the Task and Finish group. We need to be proactive. So let's use Zoom facilities and briefings to contribute to proactive work and forward planning. That's a simple wording. What it means is we can work informally, we can have the training, but our goal is to sort out the forward planning and deliver. And I believe that in doing that and being savvy and using common sense, we'll pick the work we need to do, and it will be more effective and efficient in the long run, and we'll actually probably use less resources overall for the policing community and our strategic partners than it would by not doing that.
Yep, no, I agree with you, Councillor Murphy. I think as a panel, we've always felt we needed to meet more often, but the difficulty is getting people from all around the county and Peterborough in one place at one time. It's very, very difficult. But now, as you say, we have Zoom, and that creates a whole new possibility. And I think we've generally tried to, as Councillor Shaw was suggesting, that we've got, when we have public meetings, we are all in one place at one time, so it makes sense to use the whole day. And previously we've tried to have like briefing sessions in the morning, but actually in many cases that's too late in the day. You know, the reports are already written and published. So the mornings, as Councillor Shaw was suggesting, would be a good opportunity for training. So that, or agenda planning or forward planning and so on, with the afternoon being the public meeting. But we also need meetings in between the public meetings, which can be by Zoom, where we discuss matters more informally. Perhaps that would be a good opportunity where we can invite people from other agencies to talk about their perspective on Commissioner's work, the policing, and it'll be easier to get other people involved if they can just join us by Zoom rather than having to travel all across the county. So you're absolutely right. There is a big opportunity to change the way that we work and to be more effective by scheduling virtual meetings in between the public meetings. So I absolutely agree. We need to include that in the recommendations. Councillor Daunton.
Could I just ask a practical point, and this is really through you directed to Jane. Will we continue meeting here?
That's we've got an item further down that we can discuss venues and stuff.
Okay, it's relevant to what Ed was just been saying. I mean, I think that's good if we can stay in one place. But I think yes, if we have a venue that's comfortable and that's large enough where we can spend the whole day, that will make a big difference.
Even if it's not here, I mean, I think we had agreed that Huntingdon was probably the most convenient on balance for members of the panel. So if we can get a venue there for the meeting, we can always get an appropriately sized room to meet in the morning for training or agenda planning. So yes, that will obviously be part of what Jane needs to organise. Councillor Hogg.
Can I just ask, and obviously we've got members here from Fernland and from South Cambs, and it may be that Jane's not fully au fait with the facilities that are available at those councils. You know, have they got suitable meeting rooms? I mean, clearly for me in Peterborough, having to go down to South Cambs is not ideal, but you've come to me, so it's almost, you know, I would be wrong to complain about having to go to South Cambs.
We have taken them around in the past. I've worked at Fenland. Fenland have a decent size chamber. We could do it in there quite easily, and there's a train station within a minute's walk from Fenland. We've been to, was it Camborne we went, but we struggled there, didn't we? Did we go to South Cambs? Did we struggle there? Oh, that is Camborne. Yeah, we struggled there.
Why?
Yeah. Pardon?
What was the struggle at Camborne?
We were in I think we were given a room, but it wasn't the room that we should have been given, and it was a tiny room,
Okay.
so we were all squashed in.
What I was going to say is that South Cambs Hall has a perfectly big, certainly be big enough for a meeting like this, and many others to attend as well. So we do have a perfectly good meeting room, but you'd need to specify the size of room that you need at the time you make the booking. I'm sure you did try to do that, but it's to the south of the area, so we recognise that. But it's a perfectly good room for a meeting.
Yeah, I think that was what was booked, but we didn't get it. So it kind of, when you actually take a meeting somewhere else, there's so much to think about. So when things go wrong, it kind of puts you off going somewhere else again. We've done it at Shire Hall as well, but that was like not that we can now anyway. No. So then I think it was then decided that it would stay at Huntingdon until COVID hit, obviously. So.
We could do another poll of members to see which, where they would be happy to meet and prioritise those and pick the venues on that basis where we've got the freedom. But at the moment, as Jane's saying, the difficulty is just finding venues that are available at all. Councillor Lim.
Although you are right, we do have Fenland Hall. What I would say about that is it's not very well ventilated and it's definitely not air-conned and things like that. So in winter time it would be fine, but hot summer days, I'm not sure everybody would want to sit in there all day.
No.
Councillor.
Also, I think if we could have somewhere that's accessible by public transport, that would be both good, a good zero carbon effort, but also good for those of us who are not keen on driving long distance.
That's why Huntingdon was chosen.
It was good, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, bus. Yeah, thanks.
Unfortunately, public transport is non-existent there, so...
Yeah, I was going to suggest the boathouse in Wisbeach, but then you've got the same issue. You're not going to get in there on a train.
Or maybe we have the meetings on a bus. Okay, Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the recommendations. Is that okay, Chairman? Yeah. I think we've really got an opportunity now to reset the relationship with the Commissioner, and I think that the recommendations really underline that. And I just wonder how other members think that we might go about doing that. I mean, one thing that occurred to me is in the past, it's been really difficult to ask for information on things that are not working. I mean, Edward, you mentioned that 101, and clearly that's not working, and the Commissioner himself found that out. And really it would be to establish a relationship which was good enough and collaborative enough to be able to look at what's not working and to work through that. And that, for me, would be that would mean that we would be really effective.
Okay, I mean, I think we need a longer discussion about what these recommendations mean in practical terms, because they are mostly quite general, and I think we are, pretty much all in agreement with them. But they need to be, some of them obviously have implications for resourcing from the OPCC and in fact from our own officers. So I think we just need to have those discussions perhaps in a bit more detail, whilst provisionally accepting these recommendations as they stand, but with the addition of including more virtual meeting and liaising with the OPCC. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, I meant to ask before, and that is, could we have a different version of the slides? Because they are cut on both sides, And although we can get the gist of it, it is quite hard to read them without. I'm not quite sure what's happened to the presentation as it's come out on the paper.
They have to be made into a PDF for a pack. So I can send you via email. I can send you the PowerPoint version.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So that we can see them properly. Thank you.
Okay, so the recommendation I think that we'll take is that we agree to organise the training day provisionally on the 27th of September with the Institute for Scrutiny and Governance, and that we will go through the recommendations in detail then. So I think we're accepting the report, and we're going to take the recommendation to spend a day developing these recommendations at a full-day training session. Does that make sense?
And Chair, I take on board the recommendation to use Zoom facility briefings to contribute to proactive work and forward planning.
I think if we kind of note those in the notes on the meeting, but rather than getting a formal adoption of recommendations at this stage, which will kind of require a more detailed discussion, I think the formal recommendation is that we accept a day's training with the Institute while we go through the detail of the recommendations, but with the additional notes from this meeting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes, because actually what the Institute will do with us is then develop the protocol, the framework for the ways of working, and that categorically would be something that we would write into the protocol in terms of the way in which we are going to work to achieve these
so everything that you've all mentioned would become part of the protocol. So it wouldn't need to be a recommendation, it would be within the protocol as how the panel would actually work. So by you agreeing as a recommendation that we will do this on the date in September, then everything that you've mentioned can be put into the protocol as how we will work, or how the panel will work as a whole.
And then we'll bring that protocol to a panel meeting probably in November, I'd imagine, for formal adoption there. And then that means all the detail gets dealt with in in a conversational setting rather than a formal public meeting. Okay, so if I propose that, so they're agreeing to a day's training with the Institute to work through the detail of the recommendations with the additional notes from this meeting through discussion. If I propose that, can I have a seconder? Councillor Lynn. And so we'll progress that. So Councillor Bywash, I appreciate you now need to leave, so thank you very much. Okay, so we only have some hopefully very quick items to complete the meeting. Going back to agenda item 14, the rules of procedure. We review these annually. Do any members have any suggestions or comments? See, Fiona's been hanging on all meeting for this. I'm sorry, Fiona, we're going to disappoint you.
That's fine.
But if any members do have any on review, any reflection, any issues, then pass them to Jane and we will review them. But okay, we continue with the current rules of procedure. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 15, the Police and Crime Panel's annual report. This is Jane's report of our year. Are there any comments, questions on this? I just had one observation that there are some references to APCC where it should be OPCC, which just is slightly confusing. If we could just correct that.
I think that's autocorrect. I apologise.
Well, somehow the autocorrect expanded it very.
It does, yes.
into Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, which was
so I will
quite
change
clever.
that. I do apologise.
Okay, so Councillor Sharp.
It's just one comment really. Page 129. It's obviously the elephant in the room. I was going to say whatever you describe is the fire authority in terms of the fire reform. So obviously that's going to come forward to us at some stage. It may be a fait accompli. It may be imposed. I don't know, but obviously at some stage we're going to have to bring it into the work programme if and when it happens.
I bring it up regularly with both Jim and the new commissioner. So I think everyone's in a sort of holding pattern. They know the government is going to almost certainly mandate commissioners to look at this, but they kind of want to know what the rules are, what funding is going to be made available, and what hoops they've got to jump through to demonstrate business cases or whatever else. So at the moment, it's unknown. But we too did have an additional meeting scheduled each year with the view that would give us the extra capacity to consider fire as well, and we will restore that if and when necessary.
Chair. Yeah, I think I nearly asked the question earlier on actually of the police commissioner, whether I should or not, who knows, but I think it's proper for us to informally engage with the Commissioner, perhaps through you, Chair, about this issue. So we're ready to deal with it, and we can inform his developing views on his position as well, and our position.
I agree, and I think actually we should also involve the Fire Authority. I think one of the concerns and what gave rise to the judicial review was that they were not involved. It was kind of like a takeover. And I don't think this commissioner is going to take that approach at all. So I think as soon as the government has set out a timetable and some rules, then yes, I agree with you that we need to engage with the commissioner and the chair of the Fire Authority, who is actually a new chair, to start those discussions and make sure that the transition is as smooth as possible. Councillor Daunton.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, because when I joined the panel, these discussions were already sort of midstream, and I never really got to grips with what was going on. I think that we never really had a full explanation. I mean, we did have people on the panel in that time, I think Councillor Giles and Councillor Shallons, who were on the Fire Authority, I think, or had been. So there were some members of the panel who were really fully au fait with the background and the issues, and others of us who weren't. And I'm sure that Jane provided us with papers, but it was quite difficult to get to grips with what had gone on in the past and what was going on at that point. So it would be good, really, to have a bit of going over the ground, I think.
Well, I mean, arguably, it never came into our purview because, other than considering the business case, it never went ahead, and it was the Fire Authority that took out the judicial review. So they had their reasons and they justified them. I think that's kind of water under the bridge. I think we now need to look at how we make sure that what almost certainly will be a mandated transition happens smoothly, and that trust is maintained between all parties involved, because clearly there was a complete loss of, complete breakdown of trust, which was at the root of it. Councillor Hogg.
Am I right in saying that the current commissioner hasn't got a desire to push this forward, that it will only happen if central government are basically pushing the agenda? So essentially, it'll happen in the fullness of time, rather than, and it will be a fait accompli, rather than where previously it was the previous incumbent that was trying to drive that agenda.
Yes, but that's in part because of the Home Office position. So the Home Office wrote to the OPCC to basically say this process is suspended while we reconsider. I mean, so they basically said that the business case was no longer no longer sufficiently up to date to be relevant. So the whole process would have to be repeated. So basically, they're now waiting for the government to say, okay, well, these are the new rules for how this progresses. So at the moment, nobody knows. It's not actually a choice for the Commissioner. Councillor Bradnam.
Does this panel have a view? I asked this. I'm always the one who brings the elephant right into the middle of the room. But does this... I know we don't, as you said, the Commission will be taking his view more from the government, but do we as a panel have a view of what we think would be preferable? Or is that irrelevant because it'll be a decision made by government?
Councillor Murphy.
It's absolutely the right question, and informal briefing on Zoom, we can establish what our view is, and we can share that with the Police and Crime Commissioner, and we can take into consideration other factors. Like the Chair said, there was a judicial review which was successful because the process was flawed, because a party wasn't properly involved. And we can take on board other factors as well, because we know elsewhere fire and police are with the devolved mayor. You know, and we're getting a sniff of what's happening on changes in that now. So, yes, we can have a view, whether it's going to be unanimous or there'll be a minority view or not. But I think that's quite good to suggest, not perhaps today to form the view, but through our informal working.
I think, just to be accurate, I don't think the judicial review did succeed. I think it was never determined, but possibly Fiona would be able to clarify that.
So it would be helpful to know whether this panel would like to have a discussion of what its view is. Perhaps Fiona can advise, as you say.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not aware of any outcome of the judicial review, so that would make me feel that it hasn't been determined for whatever reason. I think Councillor Murphy's right. It would be appropriate for you to have that as an informal session if you were wanting to form a view rather than in public session.
Thank you, Fiona. That's good advice, I think.
So can I request that we have that, an informal session to consider our view? Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to make a recommendation, or do you want to make the recommendation then, that we have an informal meeting to discuss fire governance, and to which we might want to invite the chair of the Fire Authority and the OPC and the Commissioner, so that we can have an always discussion to get people's views and help inform how we will respond when the time comes.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to propose that.
Okay, well, I'm happy to second that. Okay, were there any other comments on the report? I just wanted to suggest that over the next 12 months, the panel will focus on the following key areas. One of those, quite importantly, I think, is overseeing and contributing to the development of the PCC's police and crime plan. So we've got that on record. And I somewhat question the liaise with the HMIC FRS. I mean, it may be worth having some sort of informal contact with them, but actually they really inform the commissioners holding the constabulary account. The HMI does not scrutinise the OPCC, so they're not really actually one of our primary sources of information reference. But otherwise, are we happy to note that report?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Moving swiftly on to the administration of costs and member expenses. Are there any comments or questions on this? Councillor Hogg.
I note that the printing of agendas was £560 thereabouts for 1920, and it was down to zero for 2021. Is that something that we're looking to continue, as in to no longer be printing and sending out agendas unless members require? I think it's we've got a year without them. And I don't know how the members feel as to how that went, but I think that would be something that would be pretty good to to continue, well, to discontinue, as it were. And the other question, I have, so I sneak another one in there, was that I know that there's £1,787 worth of equipment.
I haven't got the breakdown for that actually on me, but that's to do with new laptops. This is because Chromebook didn't work, so we had to have new laptops, new mobile phones and that type of stuff. Okay. So that all comes out of that budget.
Okay.
It should be noted that this budget is paid for directly by the Home Office up to the amount that's billed, as long as it doesn't exceed the maximum that's permitted. And if we don't use it, then yes. Yeah, so it's not that it's taking money away from something else in the local authority, which is unusual and a perverse incentive to waste it possibly, but I don't think we have. But on your point about the continuing to print agendas, I think perhaps if we just poll members to find out what their individual views are, because obviously they're not all here, and at the very least I think we just make it optional so that people can opt in to receive agendas by post.
Well, I can do. The only thing is sending them out. I would need to come into the office to post.
Well, I mean, I think we're talking about post-COVID. I think for as long as
I have to print several for public if they come in, because that is a legal requirement. But bearing in mind, you've got 160 pages worth of a agenda today that you will use for 2 hours or so of a meeting, and then it gets disregarded, and we've all managed for 18 months. It wasn't something that I thought I would even put to you guys, as I thought everybody was managing fine. So it's entirely up to you, but I thought it was the way forward. So
can you use the microphone?
Could we retain the option to request a printed agenda if any member felt that was important to them?
It would come out of our budget. Here at Peterborough we don't actually print agendas for members, so it's not something that we would normally do. We do it if you have a medical problem, we would print you one, but other than that we wouldn't normally. If you felt a need to, then
well, perhaps if
you have an option to print them yourselves, I don't know how you work.
I think if we email all members and substitutes and just say that with the policy going forward is proposed to be that we go electronic, and if anybody has any concerns about that, to respond, and then we'll consider what people's reasons might be and whether they can be accommodated. Councillor Murphy.
I think that's a practical way forward. I took it that we had a report before us today which was setting the budget out, and when the question was asked, does that mean there won't be any printed, it clearly meant there was not printed, and I would have been happy to support that. We've had it sent to us, members have had it sent to us as there to read. It's what the report said, it's the budget. But it sounds as though we are minded to agree that as long as there is a bit of a round robin, which is a bit of a fudge, but we can probably get away with it because it may be just in exceptional circumstances a few quid is spent. Maybe if the budget contained £400 or £500 for miscellaneous, it would have been sort of belt and braces and encompassed all that.
I think, to be clear, it's not actually a budget, it is a report of expenditure.
I mean, I would argue that the biggest cost is actually the postage. The officer's time. That the printing. You say you print some anyway for
I
the
don't
meeting.
print them. You have the officer time of who is in the printing, so
Yeah.
you have their time as well as obviously
Yeah.
my time and the postage. Yeah.
But if you're already printing some for the public anyway, because you're required to.
But there is a different time, though. Those are printed on the day.
Oh, okay. Right.
Okay. Fiona, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair, but not on this issue. I just wanted to go back to the feedback. The judicial review issue. I just refreshed my memory on it from the last report that came here. And the second judicial review application was dismissed. But the Home Office informed the Commissioner that because of the passage of time since the business case had been approved, that an updated business case needed to be required, and they wouldn't be able to consider that until after the Police and Crime Commissioner elections in 2021. So we are awaiting that. That's where the pause is in the process.
Okay, so in theory, the Commissioner could restart that process unilaterally. In other words, he doesn't have to wait for the Home Office to give him a green light.
I would imagine he would have to, yes, have to have the green light from the Home Office.
Okay. I think that's clear. Thank you very much. Okay, so are we happy to note the report of expenditure? Thank you. We've been through the task and finish group, so our final agenda item on this very long agenda are future dates, which I hope you've all received notification from Jane and are now incorporated into your calendars. There's two additional dates. No, actually, the 27th of September is on there. That's the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny Training Day. Jane, you had a provisional date for the conference, the annual conference. And there are two items to be discussed. One is venue, one is streaming to YouTube. I think actually both of these, we don't yet have enough information to make a decision because of the difficulty of booking venues, because we just don't know what the circumstances are looking forward in terms of what COVID rules will be.
The conference, which they're hoping is going to be a physical one back at Scarman House at the Warwick Centre, is on the 2nd of November. So I'll send an email out. So if you wish to go, let me know, because obviously I have to book and pay for that. For those of you that haven't been before, it is well worth going. You get to meet all the other panel members from the other panels across the country. But yeah, it's on the 2nd of November, but I will obviously send that out to you.
It's at the University of Warwick, but it's actually in Coventry. It's not easy to get to by public transport. In fact, it takes almost all day to get there by public transport.
It ends up being an all-day event, basically.
So I think we will try to organise. If it could indicate whether they are interested in going without worrying about travel, and then we'll organise the travel separately. So we'll either, if there's enough people, we could have another go at hiring a minivan. Otherwise, last time I think I drove us. So
I'm not hiring a minivan again. I'll leave that in your hands, and you can let me know.
Councillor Murphy.
Yes, Chair. On meeting dates, I would ask, today this meeting has fallen on Eid, and I certainly wouldn't arrange interviews or meeting days on Christmas Day or Boxing Day. So could I ask that in future we don't have these meetings on the festival day of Eid? It's only 1 or 2 days a year, and you can predict.
I apologise, I was completely unaware.
Point taken. Just returning to the two issues about the venue and streaming, I don't think there's anything useful we can say about the venue, but I will do a poll as to where people would be happy to meet and to put them as kind of in some sort of order of priority, so that we can just either reconfirm that Huntingdon is where we'll prefer to have meetings, or if there are other venues that people are equally happy to meet at, The issue with streaming is that clearly there's a public benefit in having it streamed, but there's also a significant cost. And if the panel is having to bear that cost just for its own meetings, it's probably going to be difficult to justify, given that it requires an additional member of staff as well as all of the kit. But if it were the case that Peterborough kits out a meeting room, or any of the councils kit out a meeting room with streaming equipment that we can use. I mean, it could just be audio streaming. I mean, that may be an option. Then we can look at that. But I think we have to figure out the venue first, and then look at the streaming issue second. Councillor Murphy. Yes.
The combined authority have met and moved around the county for their scrutiny committees. Fenland, Huntingdon, they've done it publicly accessible through public transport. However, if the local authority of Peterborough are providing pro bono streaming facilities, we may want to bear that in mind when we make the final decision about venue.
Yeah, I mean, Peterborough, as I understand it, has yet to make a decision on that. So
it's quite a costly service. So
just to let on. Councillor Murphy mentions overview and scrutiny. That's met last month, sorry, at St Ives, and it's meeting again next Monday at Burgess Hall, St Ives. So I think they're not necessarily moving around the county at the moment because they're struggling, same as Jane, to get venues and ones that logistically can hold numbers of people. And I think then certainly the board met at St Ives, and I've got a feeling they're meeting there as well next week. Yeah.
Councillor Daunton.
Yes, South Cambs has just installed very good streaming facilities in the council chamber. Councillor Bradham, I'm assuming there'll be no charge should you wish to meet there. I realise, of course, that it's right at the edge of our area, but the streaming is very good.
Councillor Bradham.
Thank you. I just wanted to check, when you said prefer to have meetings at Huntingdon, are we talking about the Huntingdon Council offices?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Which are just next to the bus station and within a reasonably easy walk from the railway station. Okay, so I think we're basically saying, Jane, it's to you to monitor what's happening.
I'll let you know. It all depends on where we are COVID-wise too, so who knows.
But if you can keep an eye on what other councils are doing, if other councils choose to kit out a meeting room that would be suitable for us, that they could make available, then
and I'll see what we do this end as well.
Yeah.
I presume you welcome members from other councils to come forward with suggestions for venues and rates, etc.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Okay. Unless there's anything else, then I thank you all for your time and declare the meeting closed.